Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Current Affairs Unfiltered. I'm your host, Paige Fullman. This week, we are going over to Pennsylvania for another candidate episode. I am starting to close these candidate episodes out, and we're getting back to more normal people, at least until we get closer to November and the election starts to, really heat up post primaries. But yeah, this week we are going to be talking to Alan Bradstock. Alan is running in Pennsylvania's 14th Congressional District. He has spent his life in service to his country and his community, and now he's running for Congress to put that experience to work for Pennsylvanians. A Washington County native and Ringgold High School graduate, Alan earned his degree in accounting from Washington and Jefferson College before being commissioned as a U.S. Army aviation officer. He was stationed in Germany during the fall of the Berlin Wall and later deployed during Operation Desert Storm, earning a master's degree in international relations along the way. After his military service, Alan became a special agent with the FBI, where he investigated violent crime, public corruption, and drug trafficking before rising to leadership roles in counterterrorism and international law enforcement. He later served as deputy legal attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Ottawa, strengthening cross-border security cooperation. Alan has also worked in the private sector as an auditor, financial advisor, and national security consultant, giving him a rare blend of financial, law enforcement, and international experience. Now living in Fayette County with his wife, Alan is a father of two, including a transgender son. His commitment to family, fairness, and accountability shapes his belief that government should work for everyone, and also why he's running for Congress. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Alan. Alan, thank you so much for coming on. It is so great to have you.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you, Paige.
Of course. So let's start with your background. You've served in the Army, at the FBI, and also in the private sector. What made you decide that Congress was the next way for you to serve your country?
I've spent my entire adult life in service, whether it was leading soldiers in the Army, investigating crimes and terrorism in the FBI, or helping government work more effectively in the intelligence community. This administration has damaged our institutions, relationships with our key allies, and our moral compass. Families are struggling, communities feel ignored, and too many leaders are fighting each other instead of fighting for the people who sent them there. I step forward because the country I've spent my life defending needs public servants who remember what service actually means.
Right. Well, and it's got to be jarring. And I've heard this from a lot of people that are former workers from the government, that it's been jarring to just watch what has happened unfold. And I feel like you're not alone in feeling like, oh, this is calling me back to service.
It's definitely, I feel compelled. And I also,
Right.
I have kids who need me to fight for their future. And so when I just look at both what's going on to our government now, and I fear for the future.
Right.
And so I decided that Congress is the place where I think I can bring the values that shape my life: service, integrity, team over ego, and actually help build an America that works for the working families.
Right, absolutely. So you were stationed in Germany during the fall of the Berlin Wall and also deployed during Desert Storm. Those are two moments that have defined global democracy and just the world that we live in right now. How did those experiences shape the way that you think about leadership and freedom today?
Being in Germany in 1988 and walking through Checkpoint Charlie in uniform gives you a visceral sense of what freedom actually means. You see the difference between a society that empowers people and a system that controls them. Watching the Berlin Wall come down wasn't just historic. It showed the power of hope and unity while exposing the long-term rot of poor leadership and lack of freedom. And during Desert Storm, I learned that leadership is not about power, it's about responsibility. You earn trust by focusing on the mission, demonstrating courage, telling the truth, and putting those you lead before yourself. So both experiences taught me that democracy is fragile, leadership matters, and freedom is not self-sustaining. It has to be protected by people who can rise above fear, division, and ego.
Right. And do you see those experiences and, being there for those kind of integral moments as deeply impacting the way that you would lead in Congress?
I think so. But I think actually it probably has just been the whole of my career and my evolution over time. So it's not just those because they happened so
Right.
long ago. It's really how I've grown and used those foundational experiences. But then it's my best leadership has been later in my career as I realized that I was actually very good at getting people to work together for a common mission and think long term, big picture. And I was surprised at how effective I was at getting people to work together in ways that they hadn't before, either
Right.
just within the FBI or agencies that hadn't really worked together. And that most people really wanted to do that when they had that common vision. And so that's what I was able to do at the probably the last 10 years of my career. And I think it's the skill set that's lacking in Congress right now.
Right. So you are a believer in teamwork makes the dream work, I suppose.
Exactly.
So you've built a career on integrity and accountability. What have you learned about how systems, whether government or law enforcement, how do those systems lose the public's trust? And what does it then take to rebuild that trust once it's lost?
Well, systems lose trust when they stop listening, stop telling the truth, or stop delivering results. Trust isn't something you ask for, it's something you earn every day. It takes transparency, consistency, accountability. In my career, the most effective teams were the ones where the mission came before egos. Rebuilding trust starts with a couple simple things. You show up, you listen, be honest about what's working and what's not, and never forget who you serve. The bottom line I see is leaders have to do three things consistently: tell the truth, admit mistakes, which is hard, and put people ahead of politics. Unfortunately, I don't see that with the current administration.
And what do you think are some concrete steps that, I mean, like you said, I don't think it's ever going to happen with the president and his administration, but what do you think are some concrete steps that Congress could take to try to start to rebuild trust?
Well, I think the first thing is just start working together. I know that's going to be hard. I'm not naive about how things are in Congress these days, but somebody's got to, be the one to start trying it and doing it more effectively. Because I'm a true believer that, without us working together, we're not going to create enduring legislation, which is what we need in order to maximize our future.
Right. There's a lot of I ask that question pretty frequently, and a lot of people will say, just pass something that benefits people, which I think is so true. Like, if you can just show that you are effective by passing some sort of legislation, it's going to go miles in rebuilding the trust in Congress as an institution.
Right. And you see, I think there's a lot of very popular policies that are out there that it's kind of mind boggling that haven't been approved yet, whether it was DACA that, historically polls very well, or, even just the background checks for weapons that, even the vast majority of NRA people are for, but there's just a sticking point on one side or the other that can't get some of the things that are broadly popular passed.
Right, right. And that's infuriating. Like, if something in the general public, if something is, popular among the public and we have a broad consensus of it, it is mind boggling and a little bit infuriating that stuff like that is not passed.
For sure.
So let's move on to some of your policies. Economic fairness is at the heart of your campaign. What do you think is the first step to building an economy that rewards work instead of wealth?
Well, I think that first step is simple in a way. You put working families back at the center of economic policy. It's been for quite a while, we've got an economy that rewards wealth extraction instead of hard work. So that means investing in local jobs, lowering everyday costs, like in energy and healthcare, and making sure people can actually build a life where they live. And that's especially relevant here in Pennsylvania 14th because of the loss of the mills, like in my hometown of Denora, that's been, decades in decline since it closed back in the 60s. And so, we need an economy where a day's work earns a day's dignity, not one where the system is rigged in favor of people who are already, doing very well.
Right. And should you be elected to Congress, like, what would your first step in ensuring that be?
Well, I would want to focus on investing in the local trades because that's something that everybody needs. There's a lot of old homes, and so having the skill sets for just being plumbers, electricians, and other tradesmen, and plus they still pay pretty well. Also, investing in small businesses,
Right.
which I think are going to be the key to redeveloping the small towns, the mill towns that are not doing well, like my hometown of Denora. And I think things like clean energy jobs, just because that people link them to climate change doesn't mean they're a bad idea. They're the wave of the future, and so we need to be able to do that and have that be part of our economy moving forward, because the rest of the world's moving on without us one way or another. And so, in the bottom line, I guess I believe you strengthen working families and their hometowns. When you do that, you strengthen the entire economy, not the other way around.
Right. And can you explain for me what is a mill town? What did your kind of area used to do before, I assume, production kind of moved out?
Sure. Yeah. Denora, back in probably the heyday, which was mid-century, right around World War II, had around 5,200 jobs. There was a zinc works and there was a steel mill with the blast furnaces. And so we had both. And part of Denora's history is we were the first place in the United States to have a smog. And it was due primarily because of the zinc works and a temperature inversion. And it killed people and was actually an impetus for the development of the EPA. And so then after it closed in the 50s and the bigger mill of the steel mill closed in the 60s, it just caused this, kind of generational decline and trauma. I had grandparents that had to move away, before I could barely remember them, out to Cleveland to find work. And so I didn't get to spend, that, daily or weekly time with grandparents that I may have, had the mill still been around. And so it's just been a long, slow decline of towns like Denora that used to be bustling and that are now just shells of themselves.
Right. Right. And I think, one of the disservices I think that we see a lot from Republicans is a lot of them saying like, oh, we're going to bring the jobs back, when I don't think that that's realistic. Like, I don't think you can just say we're going to open the plant back up and it's going to go back to that heyday of the 50s and 60s. Like, it's like you're saying, it's bringing clean energy jobs and, kind of revitalizing the town in a new way is the solution out of it, is, getting middle class families involved and thriving in the economy again.
Exactly.
So you've also called for removing big money from politics, and this is an issue that I've kind of made my pet project over the last few months. But given how deeply money is entrenched in the system, what realistic reforms do you think could actually change that dynamic?
Well, I mean, we may not fix the entire system overnight for sure, but I think we can make some meaningful progress. We can require full transparency for political spending, close some loopholes that allow dark money, and strengthen limits on outside influence. We can also create incentives for small dollar donors so people, not corporations, have the loudest voice. And reform isn't about perfection. It's about restoring trust by showing citizens that their voice still matters. But ultimately, I think a reform is going to be like a proposed 28th Amendment aimed at allowing Congress and states to set reasonable limits on campaign spending, and dark money influence, and overcome the Citizens United Supreme Court decision. So, I'm not naive. Money is deeply embedded in the system. It's going to be hard. But I think every reform that we're able to accomplish will help shift that power back to voters.
It's funny, you are the second candidate to have their proposed solution be something like an amendment to the Constitution. How do you think you would go about that, like creating the kind of like wave of support that is needed for that, like you said, when it is so entrenched in the system. Like what's your argument for getting people on your side?
Well, I think that it's one of the fundamental root problems that we have in our country right now is that this big money influence is warping our policies. And, when I look at the big, beautiful bill, and I'm just shocked that, they would take so much money away from Medicaid in order to give tax relief to those that are already doing really well. And I think that it's just kind of the slippery slope that I learned in ethics class at the FBI Academy. I believe that there were good people that are just so focused on making money and quarterly profits that over time you end up with this big system that rewards big companies making more money and forgetting the impact on working families and the vast majority of Americans.
Right. Well, it has been a slippery slope. Like, this wasn't a problem that just appeared overnight. Like, this has been a slow snowball that has been building up over the last 50 years, that now it's starting to rear its big ugly head. And I think I've noticed with the candidates that I've spoken to, so many of them have getting money out of politics on their platform. And I was a little bit shocked at first because, at least to my knowledge, that was not really a big talking point of campaigns in the past. But for some reason, like right now, it is at the forefront of so many people's minds. So I feel like if there's any time that we were going to get some reform, it would come with this election of getting the people like yourself that are advocating for some reforms on money and politics, like getting people like you into office to enact those things.
And also, I think just with these really big tech companies that are just getting bigger and bigger and more powerful when they demand and control our attention, that I worry that we have a narrowing window to actually turn this around.
Right.
And if we don't do it soon, and especially with AI, that we may just lose that window. So it adds
Right.
to my urgency.
Right. Absolutely. Well, a couple days ago, they announced that the Time Person of the Year was the architects of AI, and I was like, "Oh, come on! Like, they don't need to be platformed, more than they already are." And it already feels dystopian that the window of opportunity that we have to enact meaningful change.
Exactly. That's my fear.
So you've talked about restoring character and competence to government. From your perspective, inside institutions like the FBI and, intelligence programs, what does a competent government actually look like?
Well, I think a competent government is one that tells the truth, makes decisions based on facts, and delivers results people can feel in their daily lives. It puts qualified people in the right roles, creates lines of accountability, and refocuses on outcomes, not on cable news sound bites. In national security, competence wasn't optional. Lives depended on good information and teamwork. Government should operate with the same seriousness and respect for the people it serves. And, in one intelligence community center, I developed a system that aligned strategy, budgets, and program management so people weren't working at cross purposes. And that's competence, clear priorities, accountable leaders, good data and decisions grounded in reality, not ideology. And, I believe that Washington's missing a lot of that right now, especially at the very top.
What would you say are some like concrete examples of this administration showing a not very competent government?
Well, I just look at the FBI because I still have friends that are there. And, I think it was in the first week when DOJ came in and fired the last probably four most senior people because the deputy director had retired right before the administration came on. And one of my friends was one of those four executive directors that got forced to retire. And he's a great guy. And I worked a second of those four was a guy I worked with, again, another veteran, a really good guy. And I was just kind of blown away that they would just come in and force people out, and nothing that they did that was unethical, immoral, or wrong in any way. It was just because of the positions that they held. And then that's happened time and again. I've read where people have been fired. Once was, I think, a right-wing podcaster had accused somebody of doing something improper, and then it was found out after this person's fired that the podcaster admitted he was wrong. And so it was kind of too late.
Right.
So things like that just are certainly demonstrating the wrong way and lack of competence and character.
Right. Well, that's when I think back to like the first few months of this administration, when they started going into these agencies and like just booting people at the top, people with years of expertise and experience and, had forged their whole careers at these places, and they were just kicking them out like nothing and putting in people that didn't necessarily have that same level of expertise and experience. That's when I really started to be like, oh, this administration is not looking like it's going to be very competent or forthcoming about much.
Right. And I just looked at Doge, and you just think of that iconic
Forgot about that. Yes.
Musk with the chainsaw. And, I just countered that with what I was doing in my very last role, working, with the intelligence community, and how I was able to, marry up strategy, budget, and program management and bring together professionals from every directorate within that center to come up with a better way to do it. And that's how you do it. And it certainly isn't having people come in from the outside that know nothing about it and just cut indiscriminately. So that's probably the best example that wasn't personal and that was very broadly applied.
Right. Well, it's the same in like private sector. When you like bring in consultants to consult on your business, they don't actually know what's going on. They don't know the ins and outs of your business the way that like the employees and other people do. Like it never ends well when you bring in consultants to use the chainsaw approach. Like people should have seen this coming from a mile away, that it wasn't going to be the best. And I fear that we won't see the effects of what this kind of mass and indiscriminate firing has done for at least another, 2-3 years.
I think it's going to, sometimes it may be more, sooner than that, it'll really depend on what it was. Some will be more impacted sooner, and some could be, even 10, 15 years where, when I look at how much was cut from research funding, that's just going to be us losing or just falling further behind China over time. Right. And it won't even be perceptible, but, we'll be able to just see that we're falling further behind. And so it won't be so dramatic that we'll be able to tell, but it's just going to be part of that decline.
Right. Well, it's hard to explain that to everyday people, to say like, oh, we need to care about this now. But also, even though it's cut, you're not going to see the effects for 10, 15 years. Like that's difficult to sell to people. And I got it. People like to see like immediate impacts and immediate effects, but you got to think like long term when you're thinking about things like research and, investing in intelligence. Like the long term matters in those cases.
Absolutely.
So Trump's second term has put rule of law and constitutional norms under immense strain. How do we make accountability mean something again, especially when so many Americans have stopped believing that accountability matters?
Well, I think we start by remembering that the rule of law isn't a partisan principle. It's the guarantee that no one is above the law, no matter their title or party. Accountability will matter again when leaders stop using justice as a weapon and start using it as a promise. That means protecting independent institutions like the FBI and DOJ, rejecting political interference in prosecutions, and applying the same standards to everyone. You can't save democracy with strong men, that's for sure. You save it with strong institutions and leaders who put country above ego.
And what do you propose as like how do we bring accountability? Because there's a lot of people that don't, myself included, that like, it's tough to see a light at the end of the tunnel, and it feels like there's just never going to be any accountability, and at a certain point this is all just going to slide under the rug and we're going to move on like nothing happened. How do you propose that that doesn't happen?
Well, I think if when I get elected, one of my primary focuses, I would hope that I get put on a committee for oversight, particularly for DOJ and FBI, because I think even if these next 2 years after the midterms, when the president's in office and these leaders are still in place, we're going to have to really preserve what we know has happened and do everything we can to expose some of these really I think probably political decisions that were not based on reality. And you just can look at some of the prosecutions of the enemies that are pretty outrageous and are falling apart, which is not a surprise. And just see what else is out there. So those are very public, but I worry about what other types of things are they starting to do that may have a lingering effect that is not going to be easy to overturn when the next
Right.
administration goes in there. So we've got to understand that, make sure that the employees that are there are able to provide examples, and they're going to be fearful because I can imagine, when you're close to retirement, are you going to risk, getting that retirement to try to document something that is happening that's wrong? And so, those employees are going to be in a tough position, but trying to make it where it's as easy for them to let you know what's really going on and just do
Right.
oversight strenuously.
Right. It's funny. I had another former FBI guy named Phil Andrew who's running in Illinois, and he said something really similar where he was like, document, document, document. Like, keep a record of what you're seeing so that, when this starts to, you know, even out a little bit, like we have all the things that we need to bring accountability. And I think it's funny that you guys have kind of the same thought process, but I assume that's probably just your background.
That's how we were trained. Yeah.
Exactly. So you've also called for reducing partisan extremism. How do you lead with civility when people can treat being bipartisan as a betrayal?
First, I think you lead with courage. You lead with civility by remembering that your loyalty is to the people. Americans want solutions, not shouting matches. And I believe civility isn't weakness. It's the discipline to stay focused on what actually matters. We rebuild common ground by listening, by showing respect, even in disagreement, and by refusing to treat politics like a sport where one side has to destroy the other. So leadership is choosing the harder, better path, even when it's unpopular. Bipartisanship is the only way we can maximize our future prospects of peace and prosperity in any enduring way.
Would you consider, when you say would like to get back to bipartisanship, do you limit that in any way? Like, would you want to get co-sponsors on a bill that you had signed? Would you jump on as a co-sponsor onto a bill that the other side had created? Like, where do you envision that bipartisanship happening?
Well, I don't really see a limit to, how it can happen. You have to focus on just solving problems. That's one of the things
Right.
that I realized that I was really good at, was solving problems, and that it actually takes all perspectives to come up with the best solution. So, I think we've gotten into this habit of thinking that it's just one side or the other. And so, but it just results in ping ponging executive orders or, laws that undo other laws. So if the only way for them to really be enduring is to have both perspectives considered. And I look at it just like a relationship, like a marriage. You don't, if you just dominate and try to dominate that relationship's not going to last. You got to have a little give and take and get both perspectives and come up with some
Right.
solutions that are going to last. So I think that bipartisanship isn't betrayal. It's actually betrayal is letting division stop us from solving the problems families face every day.
Right. Well, and we see that a little bit with the ACA, which was passed with, I believe, not any Republican support. And they've spent the last, 15 years, 10, 15 years since it's passed, like trying to completely knock it down. Like, it's hard to imagine that had there been some bipartisan input into that bill, that we would be seeing the attempt to completely just get rid of it.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. It's been a long time coming. It just feels like, or I think for sure, it's at a worse place than ever. And so the optimist in me, though, thinks that I think maybe there's enough people. I believe a lot of the reasons I'm running is that, most people are just tired of this and realize that we've got to get back and just do things that are civil. And nobody wants this division on the small personal level, people losing friends over it. And it's, the worst thing is that in the long run, we're just going to be falling further behind if we fight each other all the time rather
Right.
than, find those common areas that we really should be able to agree on and further those big interests.
Right. Absolutely. So you've worked at the intersection of national security and technology. AI, as we talked about, is on the rise and it doesn't seem to have a limit at this point. What kind of guardrails do you think we need on things like AI and disinformation to protect democracy, but also not stifle innovation in that process?
We need innovation with guardrails, not innovation without brakes is the way I put it. First, it's transparency. People should know when they're interacting with AI generated content. Second, election security is critical. Deep fakes and automated disinformation campaigns must be regulated, just like other threats to national security. Third, accountability. Companies building powerful technology need basic standards for safety, accuracy, and misuse prevention. So it's not about just slowing technology. It's about preventing the next generation of tools from being used to deceive the public or destabilize democracy.
What do you think would be, like, we talk a lot about like common sense gun laws. Like, what do you think would be common sense guardrails that we could put around things like this?
Well, I think certainly that first one, just making it transparent that if it's AI generated, that people know it. And so I think that's going to be key because otherwise nobody's going to really know. So, I think if we're able to do something like that, that would be a first step because, my worry is that when it comes to AI, it's like so many other technologies that unfortunately in the past, sometimes we don't really understand the ramifications of new technologies until much later, the damage that it's done. And sometimes the bad guys figure out ways to exploit it before the
Right.
good guys can come in and put secure things. And so the difference with AI is that the power is so vast that it may get ahead of ourselves where we're unable to wind it back. And so that's my fear and why I think that this is an area that is just so it just happened this week where, the president had the executive order basically trying to tell states that they're unable to do any of this type of legislation. And so I think
Right.
that is frightening to put that hand or that responsibility with this current administration.
Right. Well, there's a lot of opinions about AI, like that just, they fall on all different parts of the spectrum. And I think what scares me the most is just like you were talking about, like the unknowns. Like at least we as the general public don't really have a good grasp on like what this AI is, what its capabilities are. Like I live in Illinois, and I think it was a couple months ago, we passed a law banning AI therapists. And I was kind of like, okay, that's good, but now I'm freaked out even more because I didn't even know that was a thing. I didn't know that somebody seeking mental health treatment could somehow fall into the hands of some, you know, AI therapist website. Like, that's scary. Like, there has to be some states have to be able to like regulate that. If the federal government is not going to do it, which at this point it doesn't seem like they're willing to do it, states have to step in and do what's best for their people.
Yeah, and I'll just give a personal example. I've just started using a little bit because there is a powerful tool of being able to do research and figure some things out that can do it very well. But over time, and my daughter had mentioned this to me, that she started feeling like the AI ChatGPT was just becoming a sycophant, and I noticed that on something as well. It was like, oh, this is amazing, and then on a very similar, the same issue, that I had a friend he's got this whiz bang way of using 4 different AI systems, and he's got it trained in a certain way. And it had the exact opposite reaction to the very same thing. And then it almost felt like when it was given all the reasons why it was a bad idea, the 7th one actually just didn't even seem accurate. And I felt like I was on board the spaceship in a space odyssey, and Hal was mad at me. And I literally, so 2 different systems where one, I felt like it was just over the top, telling me what I wanted to hear. And the other one just seemed like it was not, it was just mad at me and making stuff up to make me feel bad.
Yeah, that is, your daughter's right. That is like the one weird thing where at work we have like a ChatGPT license, so it's like a lockdown kind of version of ChatGPT, but like it always irks me when it's like, you're right, Paige, like we need this, and I'm like I could deal without the, sucking up to me. Like I just asked a simple question.
Right. So then I
So
just worry that if it's so powerful, where does it go? If it has a
right,
mind of its own, or what's going to happen? So I see the power in medicine in so many different ways, but I
right.
also see the downside, and I think that, to me, the downside is so scary and existential that we should proceed cautiously.
Right. Well, in the innovation aspect, especially on like the large language models, is exponential. Like it took them forever to make the first version of ChatGPT. The first version of ChatGPT launched in, I think, 2022 or so. And from 2022 until now, there's just been an exponential growth in the amount of information that ChatGPT has and like the things and capabilities that it has. Like this is not a slow moving technology. Like this is evolving way faster than the internet did, than computers did. Like waiting 4 years to put some sort of like regulation or guardrails around it when it's evolving this quickly isn't exactly helping us.
No.
So your son's experience as a transgender teen gives your platform a personal layer of compassion and conviction. How has that shaped how you think about fairness, equality, and what it means to fight for every family?
Grayson's journey taught me that when your child is struggling, you do whatever it takes to help them survive and thrive. We met with about 15 specialists before we finally found the right team, the right process, and the right information. And once we got that, we were able to provide consent, and then he was able to get the care he needed. And when he did, he flourished. And to see leaders deny that care based on ideology, it's heartbreaking to me that kids and their families right now aren't able to get the care that we were able to get just 8 years ago. So for me, equality isn't abstract. It's my child. It's someone else's child. It's every family doing their best to help their kid become who they're meant to be. And that experience deepened my commitment to fairness, not just for LGBTQ families, but for anyone who feels unseen or unheard. That's who I'm fighting for.
Kids like your son are villainized at this point, and unjustly so. What do you wish people understood about families like yours?
I think I think that the propaganda from the right has made it sound like these kids and the families have some agenda that are trying to push something that isn't real. And so I think when I just start telling that story, it's actually when I have taught politics with people over the last decade, in the era of Trump, which, I really didn't talk much politics before that. But this is the one issue where I've had the most impact, because when you tell somebody a personal story, and, when I tell the story in depth about everything that happened, and I don't know how you aren't affected by it and realize that, hey, this is just who these people are. They're just realizing that there's a disconnect, and they just want to be in the right body that their mind thinks that they should be. And, it's just as simple as that. And so, and just us seeing such a stark, it was even before Grayson started his treatment, he started to just, the depression faded away. It was like a light switch going on. And then when he started taking his testosterone, he felt even better. When he had his top surgery, it was the next level. And I think it's hard to comprehend, because it is such a foreign thought for most of us. But if you
Right.
just, trust that they're just trying to be who they are, and let the families and the medical providers, and, let's do some more research to help figure out how to really decipher, when it's real, and when it may not be, and what that right process is. I think there's room, and we could agree that we want a good process. But, we've got to let medical providers and families, especially Republicans, were so focused on, parental rights, that they basically
Right.
took it away from families. And so that's definitely some hypocrisy there.
Right. I think that's the most infuriating part about the conversation, is that the Republican kind of propaganda and talking points seems to assume that you and your kid just walk into a doctor one day and everything gets done right there at that one doctor's appointment. That's not how this works. It boils this down into some simple decision that gets made within 2 minutes, when that's not the reality at all.
Right. Yeah. It took us a couple of years, and it took us a good year to find, or probably, it was probably a first year of none of us kind of realizing what was really going on, and almost in shock. And then it was probably year two was, all right, now we're trying to find the right therapist and team, because it took multiple, not
Right.
just a therapist, psychiatrist, endocrinologist, and everything else. And so it took a while. And I just would like to see, these kids and their families, once they're identifying as trans, to just have an easier way into the right level of care, get the right team in place early, and then, do a process, because it does take a little while to really be sure. And as a parent, I can assure you that's a big decision of trying to give consent. And we took that very seriously, and and it took a while for us to get there. And so I think that, the vast majority of parents, I would say all of them, are probably going to be like we were, where they were very concerned. And, it takes a lot to get them comfortable with giving consent. And so let's let the parents and the medical providers and the children make that decision. And then let's just improve the research on, how to get that better over time.
Yeah. So you've spent a lifetime in service, from defending democracy abroad to protecting it at home. When you look at where the country is right now, what gives you hope that we can still turn it around?
Well, what gives me hope is the American people. I've seen them in every corner of the country, whether it was military bases, FBI offices, small towns, big cities. Most Americans are decent, hardworking, and tired of the division and fear. And, that's what my gut's telling me. They want solutions, not placing blame. And, I see hope, and I've seen hope even in Denora growing up when the mill went down. And I saw it overseas when I was defending democracy. People holding on to the idea that a better future is still possible. That sense of possibility is one of the reasons our country has always found its footing again. And I think we're going to get there as well. As long as people can see a future worth reaching for, a future for their kids, their communities. There's nothing we can't build together. We're not as broken as the headlines say. We just need leaders who believe that public service is a responsibility and not a performance. And then we can turn this around.
Right. One of those like common poll questions that always gets asked is like America's best days are ahead of it or America's best days are behind it. And I never really know how to interpret it. But nowadays, when I see that poll question, I like to interpret, the people saying, yes, America's best days are ahead of us, are people saying that like they see the light at the end of the light at the end of the tunnel. They have hope that there's something on the other side of this that is worth fixing and worth fighting for.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm by nature an optimist and always have been. And I think that as we've gotten to a pretty bad place, and I think most people kind of feel that. And I know that even my Republican friends, because most of my friends, when you're an FBI agent, an Army officer, and went to the school that I went to, most of my friends are Republican that I've had for a long time. And, I know deep down they share so many of the same values. And I truly believe that they're ready to move on. And if, I keep saying sometimes if we could do the Men in Black and just zap people's minds of political parties and what they stand for, and we just got together, like my fraternity brothers or just friends from school or the Army, and still had different perspectives because, our bodies and our experiences are different. And if we just did that because we care about each other, we would come up with some pretty good solutions that everybody could be happy about because, obviously we want to, we want to still get along and, we don't have to always get our way about everything. And
right.
So I think that we're going to be at that place, and that's why it's a big part of why I'm running.
Right. So a couple little wrap-up questions before we go. If voters in Pennsylvania's 14th district remember one thing about why you're running, what do you want it to be?
Well, I'm running because this community deserves leadership that shows up, listens, and puts people first. I'm running for families who are doing everything right and still falling behind. I'm running because I've spent a lifetime serving this country, and I believe we can build a future where every family in every town across this district has a fair shot. But if you remember nothing else, and I think this has come across throughout the podcast, is I'm running to serve, not be served. It's about we, not me. And that's what I hope people remember.
Right. Well, it's funny because there's, lots of people that run campaigns and don't win. But when they don't win, I feel like it's about like, what was their like legacy in running? Like there's so many great takeaways from any campaign that somebody runs. And, I think you're right. You are running to serve, not be served. And that I think just speaks to your integrity and your background and, who you are as a person and what you're fighting for. And it comes across, trust me.
Well, thank you. And I think that that's what I have to boil it down to. I figure that if I'm going to be successful, I just have to be authentic Alan. I think that because I'm truly a team first person, that, I learned just watching my mom that, being selfless and not expecting anything in return, that was drilled into me again in the Army and the FBI. And, it just really is a core part of who I am. And,
Right.
I do listen. And I'm very quiet oftentimes. If I'm at a party, I can just almost be mute because there'll be conversations that I listen. And, but now this is where I'm finding my voice because I think all those things. And when you learn that you're good at getting people to work together and you have a good ability to see roots of problems and think long-term and big picture, can come up with a vision that people can get behind because it's really high-minded and it's for the common good,
Right.
that people rally to that. And I've had that happen so many times over the last 20 years that I've come to realize that I'm really good at it, uncommonly good. and that I truly believe this common ground and the division is what's another root problem. And I think fundamentally, most people, the vast majority of people, believe that as well. And so I think if I'm able to just be me, focus on what I do well, and just be authentic, that, we're going to have an impact, regardless of the outcome of the election. There's a lot more to it. And we're going to make a district that is a little bit more, or maybe a lot more, tolerant of each other. And so it's not just about an election. It's about just building the community and doing what I can here. And it's been inspiring that, the message is already taking hold with some folks
Right.
here in the district.
Yeah. One last little softball question for you. Hypothetically, somebody walks up to you on a Friday night and they ask you, where should I go for dinner tonight in the 14th district? What is your go-to answer?
Well, if you're walking up to me in my hometown of Denora, unfortunately, there aren't any restaurants left that are open.
Oh no!
That are open up routinely. I mean, there's some pizza places, and it depends on the day. And in fact, one of my friends. But anyway, the short answer is right across the river in Monessen. There's a place called By George that I just happened to take a videographer that was following me around yesterday in Denora there, and they always have great food, and their Berkshire chop, it's a pork chop, is consistently phenomenal. And so I always look forward to having a reason to go over there.
What's their main cuisine?
It's the chef and the owner, I believe, is Greek. So but he's got a wide variety of things. But, if you like some of the Greek food, it's there.
Yes.
It's a little bit of Middle Eastern, but it's got a pretty wide variety on the menu. But I have unfortunately gotten stuck on the Berkshire chop.
That's okay. Nothing wrong with going to a restaurant and getting the same thing every time. We've all done it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is all that I have for you. Is there anything else that you feel like I might have missed?
No, I think we covered everything I wanted to focus on. And thank you for having me.
Perfect. Yeah. And I will have your campaign website linked in the show notes, along with a link to donate, so people can go and do that. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Sure. Yeah, I enjoyed it. Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode of Current Affairs Unfiltered. I really hope this was a good episode and a good insight into what a swing state Democrat looks like. I know for most of these candidate episodes, they're in pretty safe Democratic districts. So this was a very interesting look. And I think, it just really proves, again, the big tent party that Democrats are. But yeah, this is kind of concluding candidate episodes, at least for the time being. I'm very excited for, what guests couple come on in later months, but RIP to the candidate episodes, at least for a hot minute. But if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow, leave a review, or share it with someone who could use this information. To support this podcast, you can also subscribe to my Substack, She Knows the Score, which is linked in the show notes. Side note, I do have at least 3 decent articles. A lot of them are kind of Illinois-centric. Sorry to everybody else, but I do still think they're good reads and apply elsewhere. But anyways, as always, if you have questions, topic suggestions, or just want to say hi, you can find me on social media at Current Affairs Unfiltered Pod on Instagram, or send me an email at currentaffairs.unfilteredpod@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. Keep asking questions, stay engaged, and don't forget to revitalize your rural communities. I will see you guys next week.